Emma sat at the kitchen table, head in her hands, trying to balance her budget once again. The rent was due, and her son, David, needed new shoes. Her job at the diner barely covered the essentials, let alone her dream of going back to school. She had long buried that hope, but the weight of her unfulfilled dreams still lingered. "Mum, are we going to be okay?" David asked, his innocent eyes filled with concern. Emma forced a smile, her heart aching. "Of course, honey. We always make it work," she replied, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt inside. Every day was a struggle. Work, home, sleep, repeat. Emma wanted to provide more for David, but the weight of the world pressed hard on her shoulders. It was as if she was stuck in a never-ending cycle, one she couldn't break no matter how hard she tried. At night, when David was asleep, Emma would sit by his bed and whisper prayers. She asked for strength, guidance, and a miracle, though miracles seemed so distant, almost impossible. But for her son, she couldn't afford to give up hope entirely. One afternoon, as Emma worked her double shift at the diner, she noticed a man sitting in the corner booth, watching her with quiet eyes. His clothes were expensive, yet he seemed distant, almost sad. She paid him little mind. People like him didn't usually notice people like her. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Emma asked, wiping her hands on her apron. The man, James, looked up, his gaze soft but intense. "No, thank you," he said quietly, handing her a generous tip. Emma nodded, grateful for the small kindness, unaware of the significance this moment would have in her life. As Emma returned home that night, the exhaustion of the day weighed on her. But little did she know, something was about to shift in her world. Unbeknownst to her, James had taken a quiet interest in her life. Her struggle reminded him of his own past, and he was moved by her determination. There was a ripple in the air, something unspoken but powerful. Emma couldn't see it yet, but her life was about to change. The storm she had been battling was about to meet an unexpected calm. James sat in his grand study, surrounded by luxury, but feeling emptier than ever. The quiet solitude of his mansion offered no comfort. He had amassed a fortune but lost touch with the world. His life had become one of isolation after losing his wife years ago. He gave generously to charity, but always from a distance, never seeking recognition or connection. That night, he couldn't shake the image of the young woman at the diner, Emma. Her determination despite her struggles stirred something in him. She reminded him of his late wife, who had once faced the world with the same quiet strength. James stood by the large window, staring out into the vast garden below. "What if I could help her?" he thought aloud. The idea grew inside him, but he wasn't the kind of man who offered help openly. His pride and reclusive nature wouldn't allow that. Instead, he decided he would help anonymously. The next day, he contacted his lawyer. "I want to set up a fund for someone," James said, his voice firm but reflective. "It must remain completely confidential, no names attached." His lawyer raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. James was known for his eccentricities. "Who is the recipient?" the lawyer asked, pen poised. "A woman named Emma. She works at a diner downtown. Make sure her education is fully funded, quietly." James's instructions were clear. He had no intention of ever revealing his identity to her. For the first time in years, James felt a flicker of purpose. He had found a way to make a difference, even if it was from behind the curtain. Helping Emma felt like a small way to reconnect with the world he had distanced himself from for so long. As the days passed, James kept tabs on Emma's life through a private investigator, watching as his quiet act of generosity would slowly unfold. He wasn't prepared for the impact this decision would have, not just on her life, but on his own. Emma's days continued as usual, with work at the diner and taking care of David, until one morning she found an envelope in her mailbox. It wasn't a bill or an advertisement. Her name was handwritten across the front. She opened it cautiously, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter informing her that her entire college education had been anonymously funded. She stared at the paper, disbelief washing over her. "This can't be real," she muttered, reading the letter again. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to process the news. Later that evening, she sat across from her best friend, Megan, at their usual coffee spot. "I got this letter today," Emma said, sliding it across the table. Megan read it, her eyes widening. "Emma, this is amazing. You've always wanted to go back to school. This is your chance." "But who would do this? Why me?" Emma questioned, still overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her life. "Does it matter?" "Someone believed in you enough to invest in your future," Megan replied, her voice filled with excitement. "You have to take this opportunity." Emma nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Whoever had done this had given her more than just money. They had given her hope, a lifeline she desperately needed. The mystery of her benefactor lingered in her mind. But for now, she decided to embrace the chance she had been given. That night, after tucking David into bed, Emma sat by her window looking out at the quiet street. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if the mysterious benefactor would ever hear her words. She didn't know who they were, but she was determined to make them proud. Meanwhile, miles away, James sat in his study, unaware of Emma's gratitude, but content with the decision he had made. He didn't need her thanks. Watching her rise was enough for him. The days flew by, and soon Emma found herself stepping into the bustling world of college life. Walking through the campus felt surreal, like stepping into a dream she'd long thought was impossible. She still didn't know who had made this possible, but the opportunity was real, and she was determined to make the most of it. Balancing school and motherhood was no easy feat. Every day was a whirlwind of lectures, study sessions, and caring for David. But Emma thrived under the pressure, driven by the knowledge that someone believed in her enough to give her this chance. Whoever her benefactor was, she was going to prove them right. Late at night, after David had fallen asleep, Emma would sit at the kitchen table, books spread out in front of her. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but she pressed on, driven by a quiet determination. "I'm doing this for you, David," she whispered to herself, her hands flipping through pages of notes. David, sensing his mother's dedication, would often ask, "Mum, are you studying to be a doctor?" His eyes were wide with curiosity, and Emma's heart swelled with love and pride. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, smiling. "One day, I'm going to help people, just like the doctors helped us when you were born." Unbeknownst to Emma, James was quietly following her progress, his investigator sending him reports every month. He read each one with a quiet satisfaction, proud of the woman she was becoming. His life, once filled with loneliness, now had a sense of purpose, even if it was from a distance. One evening, as Emma aced another exam, she paused to think about the person who had made this possible. "I wish I could thank you," she thought, looking up at the ceiling as if her words could reach them. The mystery of their identity still lingered, but Emma was content to focus on her journey. For James, watching Emma grow stronger and more confident was enough. He had no desire for recognition, just the quiet joy of knowing he had made a difference. Medical school was a new world for Emma, intense, demanding, and utterly relentless. Each day seemed like an uphill battle, but Emma faced it head-on, fueled by the thought that she could one day save lives. Between long hours at the hospital and even longer nights studying, she hardly had time to breathe. Yet every time she felt like giving up, she thought of David and the mysterious person who believed in her. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Emma collapsed onto the couch. David sat beside her, his small hand patting hers. "Mum, "You're going to be the best doctor in the whole world," he said, his eyes shining with innocent admiration. "Thanks, sweetheart. I'm trying," Emma replied, her exhaustion melting away under her son's loving gaze. It was moments like these that kept her going. In the quiet of her study sessions, Emma often found herself thinking about her unknown benefactor. Why did they choose me? She would wonder. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the curiosity. But more than that, she wanted to prove to them and to herself that she was worthy of the opportunity they had given her. Meanwhile, James continued to follow Emma's progress from afar. He admired her resilience, her unwavering dedication. He often caught himself smiling as he read the updates on her academic achievements, feeling a strange sense of pride. It had been years since he felt connected to anyone, and though Emma didn't know him, he felt as though he knew her. But the weight of secrecy began to press down on him. Watching Emma struggle through medical school, knowing he could never reach out and offer her words of encouragement, was harder than he'd anticipated. Still, he held back, believing it was better this way. Anonymous, distant. Emma, for her part, pushed forward, unaware of the silent guardian watching over her. Her life was a whirlwind of textbooks, hospital rounds, and caring for David. But the thought of becoming a doctor, of helping people the way someone had helped her, kept her grounded. She couldn't let herself fail. Not now. As the end of her studies drew near, the excitement of what lay ahead began to replace the exhaustion. Emma was closer to her dream than ever, and she owed it all to a stranger she might never meet. James sat in his study, the fire crackling in the hearth, as he read the latest update on Emma's progress. She was thriving, nearing the end of medical school, and he felt a strange mixture of pride and longing. For so long, he had lived a life of solitude, disconnected from the world, but Emma's journey had rekindled something in him, a sense of purpose, even if it remained hidden in the shadows. "She's remarkable," James murmured to himself, setting the report aside. It had been years since he'd felt connected to another person, even if Emma didn't know he existed. The private investigator he had hired would send monthly updates, detailing Emma's accomplishments, her challenges, and her unwavering dedication. James found himself looking forward to these reports, his life once filled with emptiness, now quietly intertwined with hers. As Emma reached new milestones, James wrestled with the growing desire to reveal himself. He had never intended for his support to be anything more than anonymous, but watching her success, knowing that he had played a part in it, made him yearn for connection. One evening, as he sat at his desk, James picked up a pen and began writing a letter. He paused, staring at the words on the page. What would he say? How would she react? Would it change everything? His hand trembled slightly, but before he could finish, he crumpled the paper and tossed it into the fire. It was better this way, he convinced himself. For Emma, the mystery of her benefactor still lingered in her mind. Though it didn't consume her as it once had, she had accepted that she might never know who they were, and instead focused on her future. But sometimes in the quiet moments of her day, she found herself whispering a silent "thank you," hoping it would somehow reach them. James, though unseen, felt those whispers, and though he remained in the background, his life had become brighter through Emma's success. She didn't know it, but she had saved him in ways far deeper than money ever could. The day had finally arrived, Emma's graduation. She stood among her peers, her heart pounding with excitement and disbelief. After years of hard work, sleepless nights, and juggling motherhood with her studies, she was finally about to become a doctor. David stood beside her, proudly holding her hand, his smile brighter than the sun overhead. "You did it, Mom," David beamed, his small hand squeezing hers. Emma knelt down and hugged him tightly, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. We did this together. As the ceremony commenced, Emma's mind drifted for a moment to the person who had made this all possible. She scanned the crowd, wondering if they were there, watching her achieve what once felt impossible. But there were no familiar faces, no signs of her mysterious benefactor. Still, the gratitude in her heart was overwhelming. James watched from a distance, seated far back where no one would notice him. Seeing Emma walk across that stage, wearing her cap and gown, filled him with a quiet pride. He had never planned on attending, but something inside him couldn't stay away. He had to see her final moment of triumph, even if he remained invisible to her. As Emma received her diploma, the crowd erupted in applause. Her name echoed through the stadium, and for a moment she stood still, taking it all in. This wasn't just her victory, it was the culmination of everything she had fought for and everything someone else had believed she could achieve. After the ceremony, Emma gathered with friends and family, her smile never fading. But a part of her still longed to find the person who had given her this gift. She whispered her thanks once again into the open air, hoping it would find its way to them. James lingered for a while longer, watching from the shadows as Emma laughed and celebrated with those she loved. He smiled to himself, knowing that his part in her journey was complete. It was time for him to fade back into the background, content in the knowledge that he had made a difference. Years passed, and Emma had built a life she once thought was only a dream. Now, a renowned doctor, she had earned a reputation for her compassionate care and unmatched dedication to her patients. Her journey from a struggling single mother to a successful physician was nothing short of remarkable, and those who knew her often spoke of her resilience and kindness. "Dr. Emma, thank you so much for everything you've done," one of her patients said as she visited them during rounds. Emma smiled, her heart warm with gratitude. Every patient she treated was a reminder of the opportunities she had been given and the mysterious benefactor who made it all possible. David, now a teenager, watched his mother with pride. "Mom, you're amazing," he often told her. Emma would laugh, tousling his hair. "I'm just doing what I love, sweetheart," she'd reply. But inside, she knew how far she had come and how much she owed to the kindness of a stranger. Despite her success, the thought of her anonymous benefactor never left her. Each time she helped a patient, she felt as if she were repaying the debt, paying forward the gift she had been given. "Whoever you are," she'd often think, "I hope you know how much you've changed my life." James continued to watch from the sidelines, following Emma's career with quiet satisfaction. She had surpassed all his expectations, becoming not only a successful doctor, but also a beacon of hope to those she served. He didn't need to be a part of her life. Knowing she was living the one he'd helped create was enough. Emma's career also allowed her to give back in ways she never imagined. She often volunteered her time at free clinics, treating patients who couldn't afford medical care. In each person she helped, she saw a reflection of her own past struggles, and it fueled her desire to keep going. "Dr. Emma, you're an inspiration to us all," one of her colleagues said during a staff meeting. Emma smiled, humbled by the praise. But deep down, she knew that the real credit belonged to the person who had believed in her before she believed in herself. In her quiet moments, Emma would sit in her office, reflecting on how far she had come. She had built a life she was proud of, and she was determined to use her success to uplift others, just as someone had once done for her. Time had not been kind to James. Though he had spent much of his life in isolation, age had caught up with him in ways he couldn't ignore. His once strong body now betrayed him, and his health began to decline rapidly. Despite his wealth, he felt powerless against the inevitable forces of time. The doctors he visited gave him dire warnings, but James, stubborn as ever, refused to seek regular treatment. "I'll manage," he would say, brushing off their concerns. But deep down, he knew that his condition was worsening. One evening, as he sat by the fireplace, his breathing labored, James thought about the legacy he would leave behind. He had no family, no close friends. His life had been defined by distance. But the one thing that gave him solace was Emma's success. She was the closest thing to family he had, even if she didn't know it. Maybe this is how it ends, James muttered to himself, clutching his chest as pain radiated through his body. His thoughts drifted to Emma, wondering how she would feel if she ever knew the truth. Would she thank him? Would it change how she viewed her life's accomplishments? As the weeks passed, James's condition worsened. He could no longer ignore the symptoms. His body was failing him, and he needed help. Reluctantly, he called for an ambulance one cold winter night, his pride finally giving way to the reality of his situation. When the paramedics arrived, James was barely conscious, his breathing shallow. "You're going to be okay," one of them said as they loaded him into the ambulance, but James wasn't sure. In his mind, this might be the end. Unbeknownst to him, fate had something else in store. As he was rushed to the hospital, James was about to encounter the very person whose life he had changed forever, Emma. And this meeting would mark the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. As the ambulance doors closed, James felt a strange sense of peace. He had lived a long life, and though he had regrets, helping Emma had been his redemption. Little did he know, the woman who would save him was the one he had saved so many years ago. James was rushed into the hospital, unconscious and in critical condition. The emergency room was bustling with doctors and nurses working swiftly to stabilize him. Emma, now an experienced surgeon, was called in for the case. As she reviewed the patient's file, she noted the severity of his condition, but paid no attention to his name. Her focus was entirely on saving his life. "Prepare the operating room," Emma instructed her team. They moved quickly, her leadership and calm under pressure guiding every decision. She had seen patients in worse states before, but there was something about this case that felt different, though she couldn't quite place why. In the operating room, Emma worked with precision, her hands steady as she fought to save the man's life. The tension was palpable, but she remained focused, unaware that the man lying on the table was the very benefactor who had quietly shaped her future. As the surgery progressed, Emma felt an unusual connection to the patient. She often felt empathy for those she treated, but this was different, almost like a familiar presence. Shaking off the feeling, she continued the procedure, determined to pull him through. Hours later, the surgery was complete. Emma and her team had done everything they could. The patient was stable, but his recovery would be slow. "Good work, everyone," she said, exhaustion finally hitting her. She didn't realize just how significant this operation was, not yet. James remained unconscious, unaware that the doctor who had just saved his life was the very woman whose education he had funded all those years ago. Fate had brought them together once again, but this time their roles were reversed. Later, as Emma sat in her office reflecting on the surgery, she couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just happened. She had saved countless lives before, but there was something about this patient that weighed on her heart differently. Meanwhile, in recovery, James began to stir. He had no idea that the woman who had just saved him was the very person he had watched from afar, proud of her accomplishments. Their lives had intersected once more, though neither of them knew just how significant this encounter would be. James slowly opened his eyes, the harsh lights of the hospital room coming into focus. Disoriented and weak, he struggled to remember how he had gotten there. The last thing he recalled was the unbearable chest pain, the call for an ambulance, then nothing. Now he was alive, though barely, and he didn't know who had saved him. In the hallway outside, Emma reviewed James's post-surgery chart, unaware of his true identity. The surgery had been difficult, but successful. "He's stable, but we'll need to monitor him closely," she told the nurses. There was still much to be done, but for now, the danger had passed. As Emma stepped into the recovery room, James turned his head slightly to see her enter. Their eyes met, but neither showed any sign of recognition. Emma gave him a kind, professional smile, but something in the air shifted. She felt it too, a strange pull, as if they were connected in ways she couldn't understand. "Mr. Bennett, you're in recovery now. You've been through a major surgery, but everything went well. I'm Dr. Emma, and I'll be overseeing your care while you're here," she said, her voice gentle but focused. James nodded weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Doctor." He studied her face for a moment longer than usual, feeling a strange familiarity, but his mind was too clouded by fatigue to dwell on it. As Emma checked his vitals and adjusted his IV, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was special. She had saved lives before, but this felt different. There was something about James, something she couldn't place. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or perhaps there was something deeper at play. After leaving the room, Emma found herself thinking about the patient more than she usually would. "There's something about him," she thought, but she quickly brushed it off. Her job was to heal, not to get lost in her thoughts. Still, the connection lingered. James, lying in the quiet of the recovery room, couldn't help but feel like fate had intervened in his life once again. He had come close to death, only to be saved by a doctor whose presence seemed to stir something inside him. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was just the beginning of their story together. James slowly opened his eyes, the harsh lights of the hospital room coming into focus. Disoriented and weak, he struggled to remember how he had gotten there. The last thing he recalled was the unbearable chest pain, the call for an ambulance, then nothing. Now he was alive, though barely, and he didn't know who had saved him. In the hallway outside, Emma reviewed James's post-surgery chart, unaware of his true identity. The surgery had been difficult but successful. "He's stable, but we'll need to monitor him closely," she told the nurses. There was still much to be done, but for now, the danger had passed. As Emma stepped into the recovery room, James turned his head slightly to see her enter. Their eyes met, but neither showed any sign of recognition. Emma gave him a kind, professional smile, but something in the air shifted. She felt it too, a strange pull, as if they were connected in ways she couldn't understand. "Mr. Bennett, you're in recovery now. You've been through a major surgery, but everything went well. I'm Dr. Emma, and I'll be overseeing your care while you're here," she said, her voice gentle but focused. James nodded weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Doctor." He studied her face for a moment longer than usual, feeling a strange familiarity, but his mind was too clouded by fatigue to dwell on it. As Emma checked his vitals and adjusted his IV, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was special. She had saved lives before, but this felt different. There was something about James, something she couldn't place. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or perhaps there was something deeper at play. After leaving the room, Emma found herself thinking about the patient more than she usually would. "There's something about him," she thought, but she quickly brushed it off. Her job was to heal, not to get lost in her thoughts. Still, the connection lingered. James, lying in the quiet of the recovery room, couldn't help but feel like fate had intervened in his life once again. He had come close to death, only to be saved by a doctor whose presence seemed to stir something inside him. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was just the beginning of their story together. As the days passed, James slowly regained his strength. Emma continued to check on him regularly, each time feeling a deeper connection that she couldn't quite explain. There was something in his eyes, a familiarity that tugged at her heart, though she had never met him before. Or had she? One afternoon, as Emma sat by his bedside reviewing his chart, James spoke, his voice weak but steady. "You remind me of someone," he said, his eyes searching hers. Emma looked up, surprised by the comment. "Really? Who?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. James hesitated for a moment, as if he were trying to gather the right words. "Someone I helped a long time ago. She was a young woman, struggling, trying to make a better life for herself and her son." His words hung in the air, and Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. Her heart raced as memories of her own past surfaced. Her struggles, the mysterious benefactor who had changed her life. "That sounds familiar," she said softly, her mind spinning as she pieced together the fragments of her past and the man in front of her. James saw the shift in her expression and continued, "I never told her who I was. It wasn't about recognition. It was about helping someone who deserved a second chance." His voice was filled with emotion now, and Emma's hands trembled as she began to realize the truth. "Was it you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with the weight of the revelation. James nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of relief and vulnerability. "It was me," he confessed. "I didn't want you to know. I just wanted to see you succeed." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as the full impact of his words hit her. This man, lying in the hospital bed before her, was the one who had changed the course of her life. He had been the unseen force behind her dreams, her success, and now she had unknowingly saved his life. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was filled with the unspoken bond that had connected their lives for years, without either of them fully realizing it. Tears streamed down Emma's face as she sat beside James, her heart overwhelmed by the revelation. "All this time," she whispered, her voice shaky, "you were the one who gave me the chance to follow my dreams. You saved my life." James, his own eyes misting, gave a faint smile. "No, Emma. You saved your own life. I just gave you a small push." His voice was soft, full of sincerity. He had never imagined this moment, but now that it was here, he felt a weight lifting from his chest. Emma shook her head, still in disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Everything I've achieved, it's because of you. Without your help, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be a doctor. I wouldn't have been able to give David a better life." James reached out, taking her hand in his. "You don't need to thank me. Watching you succeed has been enough." His voice was weak, but the sincerity in his words was unmistakable. The room fell silent for a moment as they both reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude, but also a profound realization that this man, this stranger who had once been so distant, had become a central figure in her life without her even knowing. "I've always wondered who you were," Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "There were nights when I'd pray, thanking someone, even though I didn't know who it was. And now, here you are." James smiled weakly. "I never wanted recognition. I just wanted to help you, like I wish someone had helped me long ago." For the first time, Emma saw James not as the mysterious benefactor, but as a man who had quietly carried his own burdens, helping others while keeping his own pain hidden. "You've done more than you'll ever know," she said, her voice full of emotion. As they sat together in the quiet hospital room, a bond formed between them, one built not just on gratitude, but on shared understanding, compassion, and the strange ways life brings people together. In the quiet of the hospital room, Emma and James shared a moment of deep reflection, their lives intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. Emma sat beside his bed, holding his hand, her heart full of gratitude. "I've thought about this moment so many times," she admitted softly. "I never thought I'd get the chance to thank you in person." James smiled faintly. "You never had to thank me, Emma. You've done more than enough just by living the life you were meant to live." For the first time in years, James felt a sense of peace. He had spent so long hiding from the world, believing that his only contribution could be made in the shadows. But now, seeing Emma, strong, successful, and full of life, he realized that his small act of kindness had created a ripple effect far beyond what he had imagined. Emma thought back to all the struggles she had faced, the long nights of studying, the moments of doubt when she didn't think she could continue, and now here she was, sitting with the man who had made it all possible. "You gave me hope when I had none," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You changed everything." James squeezed her hand gently. "You had that hope inside you all along. I just helped you find it." The two of them sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on how their lives had come full circle. Emma thought of all the patients she had helped, the lives she had touched as a doctor. In every act of care, she had unknowingly honored the man who had once believed in her future. "You know," Emma said, her voice thoughtful, "I always felt like I was doing this for someone. I just didn't know who. Now that I know it was you, it makes all of this even more meaningful." James felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "I'm glad I could be a part of your journey," he said quietly, "and I'm proud of the person you've become." As the day turned to evening, Emma stayed by James's side, reflecting on the unexpected ways life had brought them together. She had saved his life, just as he had saved hers, and now they both had a deeper understanding of the impact one act of kindness could have. James' recovery was slow but steady, and throughout the process, Emma remained by his side, visiting him daily. Their bond grew deeper with each passing day, and they spoke often about life, gratitude, and the unexpected turns their paths had taken. The hospital staff noticed the unique friendship between the two, but no one truly understood the depth of their connection. As James grew stronger, he began to reflect on his own life, the years he had spent in isolation, and the choice he had made to help Emma. For so long, he had believed that his life was meant to be lived in the shadows, that his role in the world was to give without being seen. But now, he realized that by staying hidden, he had missed out on the very thing he had longed for: connection. "Emma," James said one afternoon as she sat by his bed, "I've spent most of my life running away from people, from the world. But helping you, it made me feel alive again. Thank you for letting me be a part of your journey." Emma smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "You were never really running away," she said. "You were just waiting for the right person to connect with. And now you're not alone anymore." As James was discharged from the hospital, Emma stood by his side, helping him as he took his first steps toward a new life. They had both saved each other in ways they hadn't expected, and now they were moving forward together, no longer strangers, but friends. In the months that followed, James became a part of Emma's world. He spent time with her and David, watching the boy grow into a young man, proud of the life Emma had built. The once reclusive millionaire now found joy in the simple moments, the laughter, the shared meals, and the sense of belonging that had eluded him for so long. Emma, too, felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had always believed in the power of kindness, but now she had experienced it firsthand in the most unexpected way. Her life had come full circle, and she was grateful for every twist and turn that had led her to this moment. As they walked together in the park one day, Emma looked over at James and smiled. "Thank you," she said quietly, knowing that those two words carried the weight of everything they had been through. James smiled back. his heart lighter than it had been in years. "No, Emma, thank you." And in that moment, they both knew that their lives were forever changed by kindness, by gratitude, and by the unexpected ways that fate had brought them together.